BusinessNet Explorer, product news podcast channel. This is B&E Product News, supporting specifiers and buyers. This podcast is sponsored by the B&E Product News podcast library. Well, hi, this is Mick de Leyburn for BusinessNet Explorer, and welcome to a special bite-sized learning edition of our B&E Product News brand leader interview series. Today we're talking with Dave Marshall-George, Sales Director at Condair, the humidity control specialists. And we're going to be talking about how dehumidifiers can be used in commercial cold stores and freezers to potentially improve safety and efficiency, as well as saving energy. Well, Dave joins us on the phone. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Mick.
Dave, so what sort of cold stores are we looking at, and what do dehumidifiers do for them?
Well, we're looking at large commercial cold stores and freezers that are operated by companies like food manufacturers, the type you could drive a forklift truck into, big warehouse environments that are being maintained at temperatures from around 4 to minus 28 degrees C. And what a dehumidifier can do for them is remove the excess moisture that inadvertently enters these areas through doors and entrances during the normal day-to-day operation.
Okay, and why do you do this? What are the benefits?
Well, there are three main reasons a cold store operator wants to remove or ideally prevent moisture entering their cold store. Firstly, moisture in cold air can turn to mist, just as it can do on a frosty morning, and this will block visibility, which in any industrial environment can be dangerous. But in an extreme environment such as a commercial freezer with forklifts zooming around, it presents a real risk. And secondly, increased humidity in an environment below zero will result in more ice. So as soon as the moisture in the air hits a cold surface and condenses, it will freeze. And this will typically happen very close to where the moisture enters the room, which is by doorways and entrances.
So ice could build up on the walls, ceiling, even on the floor?
Yeah, absolutely. And this presents a direct risk to health through slips and falls, or machinery skidding, or simply blocks of ice detaching from a height and falling on somebody. Ice can also stop mechanisms from operating, such as a door mechanism or safety kill switches. And because this happens mainly in doorways, this is where signage often is, where lights are located, or where things like temperature switches are placed, all of which can be impaired with a thick sheet of ice on top. And lastly, a third and major reason to dehumidify the air in a freezer is that it reduces the need to defrost the fridge system. Now, as you can imagine, the huge chiller plants serving these large areas will frequently need to be defrosted as ice builds up on the evaporators. And that's part of the system where the air is blown across a cold surface and is chilled. So reducing the amount of water that's in the air reduces the ice on the refrigeration system, resulting in less defrost cycles. So, in summary, Mick, using dehums in a freezer will prevent mist and reduce ice on both the inside of the cold store and on the chiller plant itself.
Well, this all sounds great, Dave. Sounds like there are lots of obvious benefits. So, is this relatively commonplace? Is using dehumidifiers a well-known thing within the frozen and cold storage industry?
Surprisingly, Mick, it's not. Companies tend to simply accept the downsides I mentioned as part of their business process, as an unavoidable evil of working at such a low temperature. Ice is routinely hacked off and defrost cycles planned into schedules, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. And another reason I think why it's not commonplace is that dehumidifying a working freezer is actually a really difficult thing to do, or at least to do effectively. It's such an extreme environment. When you're dealing with water under these conditions, there are so many variables to consider. Get it wrong and things freeze up, which causes problems for elements like dampers or air filters or any moving part in a dehumidifier.
All right. Well, how about water that's built up but has not necessarily frozen yet?
Well, yeah, rather than freeze, moisture can condense in areas where you don't want it to, which can cause significant water buildup and damage, particularly to electronic parts. Now, our freezer dehumidifiers have been developed over many years and across projects around the world, and incorporate lots of features that make them very robust and very effective in these environments. and also flexible. There's many different setups for commercial freezers, and we've dehumidifiers that can be employed across them all, whether the dehumidifier is being installed in an ante-room or airlock area just outside a freezer entrance, or inside the freezer itself, or outside the freezer but inside a building, or even outside the building. We've models with different configurations to be able to successfully meet each of these scenarios. And because we've got such a flexible solution, we can help a client decide which is the best setup for them.
Well, there are just so many variables. So how exactly do you do it then? Tell me a bit about the dehumidifier system.
Well, how we do it depends largely on the cold store in question and the problems they're experiencing. But in essence, we're trying to deliver the correct volume of air at a low enough humidity, as close to the problem area as possible, to stop, or at least reduce, the issues they're experiencing. So if this is icing by a doorway, we'd be delivering dry air above the entrance from a type of air curtain, so that the dew point, and that's the condition at which moisture condenses, is never reached. So no condensation means no ice. And in fact, whatever ice there is will actually disappear through sublimation.
Amazing. How about misting? That must be a problem in some situations.
Yeah, if misting is an issue, we're still actually delivering the dry air to the points of moisture ingress, which is normally doorways or maybe above a conveyed entrance. Likewise, if a company wants to reduce defrost cycles and icing on the fridge system, we might be delivering dry air directly to the evaporators. And the amount of dry air and the delivery of it, the level of humidity and where the dehum is located are all very project dependent. But we're always working with desiccant dehumidifier technology.
Okay. Now, as I understand it, a desiccant is a material or drying agent that absorbs water, right? So how does that work within a dehumidification system?
Well, a desiccant dehumidifier is a type of dehumidifier that passes wet air through a slowly rotating desiccant rotor. It literally absorbs the water from the air like a sponge. Then a portion of this wheel is heated as it passes through a hot airflow, and this hot air removes the water and allows the wheel to continually absorb more. Now, there are many different features that are special to the dehums we use in this particular industry, like exceptionally thick insulation to avoid thermal bridges, thicker than normal rotors with very specific rotation speeds, also airflow configurations and special types of heaters that are all needed to successfully dry the air in the extreme environments of a freezer application.
Okay. You mentioned earlier about saving energy. It was in connection with the defrosting process. I know energy is a huge concern for these types of companies, particularly at the moment with rising costs. Can you tell us more about the energy saving aspect to what you're doing, and also a bit about the energy consumption of the dehumidifiers themselves? Are they very energy hungry?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and again, very topical. Well, as I just mentioned, the type of technology that we're using in this application is a desiccant dehumidifier. And the main energy needed for this system is the heat needed to continuously remove water from the absorbent rotor. This drying process is called regeneration, and it literally blows the absorbed moisture from the dehumidifier to an external vent. In a cold store, there can be a lot of waste heat from the refrigeration process. A condenser coil expels the heat generated from the cold store's cooling system, and we can actually use this waste heat as an energy source for the dehumidifier's regeneration process. Now, in some cases, using this energy source alone can be enough to provide a good level of drying capacity and achieve a cold store's goals in removing excess moisture and preventing the ice or mist.
Okay, is there anything else that can be done to lower energy consumption?
Well, yeah, it's also possible to use a heat exchanger to recover heat energy from the outgoing hot-wet airflow and push it back into the incoming regeneration airflow. Now, this can further reduce the energy consumption of the dehumidifier. Now, whether these energy efficiencies can result in an overall energy cost that is less than the amount of energy being saved by the client is very dependent on the specific project. Most of the time, we're trying to help a client solve an icing or a misting issue inside a store rather than on the fridge system and the energy savings are largely a secondary objective. However, in some blast freezer applications where dry air has been introduced onto the evaporators, the period necessary between defrost cycles has been extended from once a week to once every 3 months. And as the dry air can be left on during the defrost cycle, the time it took was reduced from a whole day to just a few hours. So the potential energy savings there and productivity improvements are significant.
Well, that is really good news, Dave. And that's all very interesting. So what should a manufacturer do if they're interested in seeing if this could work for them?
Well, there is information on our website, www.condair.co.uk, or they can simply get in touch with us directly. We're always happy to do free site visits, review a cold store application and discuss any issues being experienced, and provide advice on how dehumidifiers might be able to help. In fact, alongside drying, we also offer humidification, where we're adding moisture to the air. Well, this can be to prevent evaporation losses or reduce static on a packaging line. So whatever humidity issue is being experienced, we've got the expertise and products to suit.
You are the humidity control specialists. Well, Dave, thank you again for joining me today for this special bite-sized learning edition of the B&E Brand Leader Interview podcast series to discuss how dehumidifiers can be used in commercial cold stores and freezers to potentially improve safety and efficiency as well as saving energy. Lots of valuable educational content for our listeners, as ever.
Thanks, Mick. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, it's always a pleasure. Cheers, Dave. For more information about Condair and humidity control, please go to www.condair.co.uk. Well, thank you for joining us for this latest edition of the B&E Product News podcast. And please, stay safe. Follow us on Twitter at B&E Product News to keep updated on our latest product news podcast releases, and visit us at businessnetexplorer.com to find more product news and information for specifiers and buyers in the construction and building services and associated manufacturing and energy sectors. BusinessNet Explorer podcasts are now available via the Apple Podcasts app, iTunes and on Spotify. You can subscribe to access our existing content and, of course, to receive every new podcast that we publish in audio format.